Welcome back, everyone. We'll now move on to the session 2 of the event that will be on the health data with trust. We have 3 presentations in this session, and the first 2 presentations are actually submitted by the same group of authors. That is from Clifton Lacy, which is the distinguished professor at the Rutgers University. And then Warren Gifford, he's the co-founder and president emeritus at the Preparedness Services. And then David Jurek, he's the chair at the Johns Hopkins Institute for Basic Biomedical Sciences Advisory Group, and also the co-founder and vice chair at the National Museum of Mathematics, co-founder and chairs at the Jurek Family Foundation, and 3 of them are the partners at the Great Plains Technologies. And then we will have a presentation from the CCRC Medical Inclusion Group. So first I will have Clifton to start the presentation. Clifton, please.
I'm Dr. Clifton Lacy. I'm a distinguished professor with clinical research and teaching responsibilities and appointments in 3 schools at Rutgers University. I have experience in healthcare. I'm a practicing physician. I have experience in public health. I was commissioner of the New Jersey Department of Health and Senior Services. But today I'm not representing the university, not representing my practice or the state of New Jersey. I'm speaking about initiatives and innovations created with my 2 esteemed colleagues, Warren Gifford and David Turok. So let me start by thanking the conference organizers for inviting us to participate in this important event. Please bear with me. I'm going to run through quickly. There are a number of important points I'd like to make. Data critical for decision-making and appropriate action. This is from the Wall Street Journal of just January 28th of this year. CDC has sown more confusion than it has offered, upgrading data collection that has hobbled decision-making. The agency has been forced to make decisions and explain them based on limited knowledge. The CDC hasn't had enough actionable information to respond in real time because its data collection methods are outdated. And the director intends to address gaps in national collection of public health data. So we also want to respond to that and do what we can. Let me just move this out of the way here. Okay. And our aim in doing this is to address the clinical arena, research and development, and also education and training. Information is important, but there are challenges to the usefulness of this information. And some of these challenges have to do with definition of populations, have to do with biases and confounders. I'm not going to discuss these right now. We can go into these later if you have an interest. I'd like to focus on poorly powered studies, because this has been a problem with the medical literature forever. I've chosen 5 summary articles here that have described the problems with type 2 problems of power from 1978 through 2021, about 50 years worth of work. If you look here, I've described in these 70 negative trials, 70 in the first one, 96 in the second one, and on and on and on. And you can see from these review articles that the studies had very, very poor power to detect differences between treatment groups. This is a very interesting one here, where almost 15,000 meta-analyses were looked at, and 70% of these, all of those, included studies that were underpowered. Now, that's not to be, that's to be expected, because they were looking at small studies and then doing meta-analyses. But this is unusual, that only 34% of those meta-analyses themselves were adequately powered to answer the question. So let's just take a quick look at this. I'm trying to move something off my screen here that is blocking my my view of my.
You're muted, Cliff.
I should be unmuted now, correct?
This
okay.
Looks good to us.
What's that?
Yeah, this looks good to us.
Yeah, okay. So here's a slide that shows 90 negative randomized clinical trials. These were negative trials in the surgical literature. This favors treatment, this favors control, and you can see because of the poor size of the study, the inadequate recruitment in the study, and the study design, you can't make a comment about treatment versus control. You can see, though, that as the sample size increases, the confidence intervals get tighter and tighter. This is not only from earlier studies there, but from studies from just this past fall. This is taste loss as a distinct symptom of COVID-19. This looks to me like noise, and it is noise. Each dot is a small study, and the taste loss, it was seen in some studies in 0% of the studies, and others are close to 100%. These studies are small and are not definitive in being able to determine taste loss as a distinct symptom. Now, trials can not only be uninformative, they can be misinformative. And this is an interesting headline from the Daily Mail of 2020. Face masks do not protect the wearer from coronavirus. There was no statistically significant difference in this study. But what they don't understand is that no evidence of effect does not mean evidence of no effect. In fact, this hit the headlines, but the study was severely underpowered. And if you look here, the 95% confidence interval around this small relative risk reduction could have been compatible with up to a 46% reduction in infection or up to a 23% increase in infection. Again, poor study design, underpowered. And these can be harmful. They can lead to erroneous decisions by policymakers, clinicians, public health practitioners, journalists, funders, and very importantly, the general public. Misattribution of studies. This is a study from Lancet Infectious Diseases from 2021 that looked at the COVID symptom study app in the UK. It's over 600,000 individuals, and it hit the press. Look at all these side effects, local side effects, systemic side effects of the Pfizer COVID vaccine. A subsequent study looked at these and looked in randomized trials and looked at the placebo group and came to the conclusion that the ratio between the placebo and vaccine adverse event proportions suggests that after the first vaccine dose, the nocebo effect accounted for 3/4 of systemic AEs and almost 1/4 of local AEs. That is, that people had negative expectations and they manifested themselves as symptoms. These are adverse experience, adverse effects that people expect and then manifest. What's the importance of disease screening and tracking? Critically important to detect disease early enough to identify correctly illness and its cause, minimize spread, identify known and emerging signs and symptoms, and evaluate effectiveness of both prevention and treatment. So let's talk about COVID-19 for a moment. Studies have demonstrated impairment of smell and taste, that these impairments are very strong predictors of COVID-19, and that temporally they precede the onset of other conventional signs and symptoms, including fever. Here's a study that shows the 7 most predictive signs and symptoms, and you can see even among the most predictive, impaired sense of smell and taste are the most predictive of those. So what did we do? We looked into smell and taste stimuli, and smell and taste stimuli normally cause pupils to dilate via activation of the autonomic nervous system. And so we looked into this as a means of developing a system. We patented a pupillary response olfactory stimuli system, which measures pupil dilation using a mobile device. And we'll discuss this more, I think, a little later and in the discussion period. But in essence, we provide a stimulus in the sense of smell and taste, which results either in pupil dilation or not. And these results get put into a tracking device and into a data repository. Now, this is good because you can perform these things daily at your house before you leave for the public. And anyone with access to an internet-connected mobile device can do this. The results are objective, and you can immediately take measures to prevent spread of disease, extremely important. We also looked at post-acute sequelae of COVID, so-called long COVID, which manifests as a brain fog, disturbance in thinking, memory, and concentration, and we created something called the cognitive ocular neurostimulation system, which is a system that provides stimuli and then measures neurophysiologic responses to stimuli in response to cognitive impairment, the cognitive impairment that accompanies long COVID. And we look at pupil dilation, eye motion, and motor skills, motor aspects. Disease screening and tracking is extremely valuable for looking at chronic conditions, for emerging and re-emerging diseases, and also, and I want to focus on this now, on major global health threats. This will be the last point I make. We're all aware of COVID-19 numbers. Of about 6 million people have died of this disease, this scourge, across the world so far. And interestingly, variants have arose, and variants will continue to arise. This is it's a virus that's able to mutate quite readily. And most of these variants will end up having a transmission advantage. They will be more transmissible. Now, we hope that they will not be more virulent and cause mortality, increased case fatality rates. However, let me remind you of this and the importance of this. Highly pathogenic avian influenza H5N1. This is rare. It exists in the world today. There are rare human cases, but look at this. It has a 60% case fatality rate. Now, fortunately, it's not efficiently transmitted human to human. If it does develop that, it would be a civilization-changing disease. And let me remind you that there's currently an outbreak of this H5N1 virus in poultry around the world. Then there's avian influenza H7N9, which has a 39% case fatality rate, and this exists in the world as well. Also, no evidence of sustained person-to-person spread yet, but it is picking up the capability to do that, and the WHO says that this has very concerning pandemic potential with high case fatality rate. And finally, the Middle East respiratory syndrome, which is a coronavirus, not so much unlike COVID, SARS-CoV-2. This has a 35% case fatality rate, and again, has rare human-to-human transmission. The point I'm making here is that these diseases, should they pick up the capability to be efficiently transmitted human to human, would be a worldwide disaster. These would be civilization-changing diseases, and underscores again, not just the need, as I have here, to track and screen chronic conditions and emerging and re-emerging diseases, but to be able to rapidly identify and rapidly address major global health threats. Now, my colleague will follow and discuss more about the Global Health Screening Initiative from the standpoint of the actual technology. And thank you very much for allowing us to present.
Thank you so much. Next, we'll have Warren to share the second part of the presentation. Warren, please.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us, and very excited to talk with you. I'm going to talk, as Cliff said, a bit about what we're doing, and in particular, we're going to ask you to think about what you can do in relation to these initiatives. So first, let me give you a little background. In 2019, David, our partner, was developing AI to process data from these various IoT health devices. And he asked me to join him at the beginning of 2020. And this work was actually part of a company we co-founded in 2002, which is currently supporting about 600,000 people in the United States with developmental disabilities and people in 7 other countries. Then, of course, COVID hit. Our 46-year-old daughter contracted a mild case of COVID in March of 2020, and she had long COVID, and 7 months later, she died. There were a lot of problems during that, and that caused us to decide that we needed to do something about it. So David brought together Cliff and me. I hired David into my division in Belcourt 36 years ago. We've been working together ever since. And David and Cliff have a similarly long relationship. So Cliff identified the relationship between the change in your smell and taste and pupil dilation. Pupil dilation was known to the dental community, but not to the medical community, interestingly. We filed a patent, and the patent office has an accelerated review process for COVID-19 related patents. And as you can see, when we got one in record time, that changed our thinking. And so rather than thinking of all these special devices, we looked at how much could we accomplish with just smart devices. And so we laid out an architecture, which we like people to proceed with. We've developed now 3 applications or 3 patents in this. But what we're seeing in the literature is lots of research going on at looking at using smartphones for all sorts of interesting things. So we think there's an interesting possibility here, which I'll talk more a bit about later. So a key here is collecting subject data so we can establish baselines and compare those thresholds for whether something is happening on a particular day. That access then to that data has to be secure and needs to be under the management of the individual or someone that they designate. Obviously, there's an interaction with the health system and putting information in. We need to be able to access that data securely for research and analysis for public information. These screening apps provide a unique opportunity for testing all sorts of things relating to exactly what Cliff was talking about. If we could get objective data and we can update that with best practices, a lot of the issues of having small studies, underpowered studies, of having inaccurate and insufficient national data, global data, can be taken care of. There will be these other kinds of screening devices, the smartwatches and so on, and relatively fewer people will have those, obviously, than smartphones. There are about 3.9 billion people around the globe connected to the mobile internet. So that data can be included. And some of the lower powered personal devices may need remote processing to be able to have the full capability. So the question is, how do you deal with the data of this? And our proposed goal there is to both improve privacy and give individuals more control over their data. Now today, you basically have to sign away most of your rights to get service. And health data is fragmented. One of my doctor's records says I'm 6 feet 3 inches tall, and another one says that I'm 5 feet 11, and I'm actually 5 foot 2. We're 5 foot 1.5 now with shrinkage. And it's the other side of that same law is that organizations are reluctant to share information they've collected, which is ironic. You give away rights and then they aren't used. And these smart devices are using that information with very few safeguards. So a lot of concerns around this. So what we're proposing as an architecture is here's the screening device, and the data from there should be contained in a secure individual processing environment. So rather than being, as way too many people do, put all of this data into one huge database, which then makes it subject to the enormous data breaches that we see every other day. And it's critical that we be able to identify that the data is assigned to the right subject and that the right subject is gaining access to that data. So we have filed another patent on a dynamic adaptive biometric identification system, which has also been accepted by to the accelerated COVID-19 process. We're also laid out a privacy agent where the individual can manage how data is accessed from them. And in order to gain access to that information, an identified user has to go through a secure access system and through a request approval process, which will be presumably both mechanical and human, leading to an approved request. And the privacy agent then mediates that either itself or getting the individual involved, leading to an authorized request. And then the corresponding data is extracted. That then goes into an aggregate processing and is combined with other people's data. And where you have an identified study, that is where you know who the person is, then that goes into the secure access system where it can be tracked and conditions that are applied. For example, the individual might limit the duration of access to data or only provides summary data. And then for those cases that are de-identified data, we have another approval process and then have that going out into a knowledge management system where it could be widely available so that we can have research and public information available to that. So we're proposing an open health screening platform. And one of the reasons is from the security conference last year, companies really don't have the ability to provide the resilience and resistance systems that are needed for this kind of data management. And so what we're looking for is people to supply the various components of this. And as we gain in more information, then you continue around that process. And so what we would like is for you to identify how you can help in this process and suggest other people that can help in that. And there's my identification, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much. We'll go ahead with the presentation from Misano, and then we will start our discussion and will be moderated by Dave. Hitomi, please.
Hi. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. I'm Misano. Today, I'm going to show you an overview of the proposal for medical inclusion on behalf of the Medical Inclusion Working Group. This research has been making the design model of medical and healthcare systems of 2050 with cyber civilization basics. That means the new medical and healthcare systems after the internet, after the World Wide Web, after blockchain, and after COVID-19. This research can be very challenging in many ways because the idea of medical inclusion needs a comprehensive perspective. This design also would need advanced technologies as well as advanced global policy frameworks in international relationships. Now, humankind has lived with the COVID-19 for over 2 years. This brought us opportunities to see how the internet and the cyber civilization can impact our healthier and happier society. Medical inclusion will lead to a fundamental transformation for conventional medical systems, which were the domestic and exclusive domain in many cases compared to other social systems. We already have a history of drastic revolutions in many aspects because of the cyber civilization. E-commerce, e-banking, social network media are examples of where such revolutions happened. Therefore, in the cyber civilization, medical systems also have a lot of room to be changed. Thus, the challenge in this research is to explore the possible new medical systems with a complete assumption of cyber civilization. First of all, I would like to get back to basics. What is the internet? It is a single global space for everyone and everything. It will have 100% coverage of the surface over our planet. People on the Earth will be eventually covered by the internet securely by 2050. The World Wide Web is also a single global space for sharing digital data as an application platform for the open development of software, which will include enormous medical and healthcare applications. And blockchain has been developing trackable trust for keeping our digital data set. On the other hand, medical and healthcare systems have several common points with these cyber civilization basics. So what is the ideal system for medical care when we can design not tightly with the incremental manner, rather visionary way? First, it must be targeted for everyone's health, of course. Second, that must have excellent responsiveness. Third, fair means for cost burden. Conventional medical care systems also should have these goals. However, after the internet has been developed, systems designed for medical care with digital technologies has been overlooked for these 30 years. Especially global cost design may have been the most challenging so far because the medical systems has been designed as a nation's responsibility as it started. However, something complicated before the internet might not be complex anymore. Therefore, I propose medical inclusion for 2050 under the cyber civilization era should be designed from the side of cost and equity with digital technologies. It needs to organize multi-stakeholders cooperation to move forward. For example, national government, commercial institutes, academics like us, religious unions, and individuals. Therefore, cyberspace will be able to include medical and healthcare. And it must have a fatal connection with real space. In short, medical inclusion is the fusion of cyber and real space on a planetary scale. The pandemic is a very global issue, so hopefully one of the solutions to fight such global risks should be a planetary scale design like this medical inclusion in the cyber civilization. We are planning right now to collect each piece of design for this research and do some testing activities one by one. At the same time, we are producing the grand discussion of the medical inclusion. Therefore, I really would like to invite people with a broad range of wisdom and ideas to join our discussion. Thank you very much for listening. John is a member of this working group, so he will attend the discussion after this. Thank you.
Thank you so much for Clifton, Warren, and Hitomi's presentation. Now we'll invite Dave to moderate the session, and then other presenters, including David and June, to join the discussion. Okay. Dave, please.
Thank you. Am I showing a picture? Yes, I am. Thank you. I'm going to open up for a relatively free discussion, but I want to start with a question to either Warren or David. Take your choice. how do you see this developing? You proposed essentially a business with, do you really mean, in previous discussions, we were talking about widespread use of methodology, which sort of implies making it more open. I'd like maybe some comments on that from maybe David Turok.
I mean, making it open, Dave, in terms of spreading it out to the world and distributing it broadly?
Yeah.
Yes, that's certainly the objective. Yes, that I think the point is that unless you do something like that, as my associate Cliff pointed out, you don't have the power of the test. You can't collect enough data on these things to really understand what's going on. And in the absence of that data, there are conclusions drawn that are either irrelevant or completely wrong. And then society marches down a path that's inaccurate and misleading, right? And so we hope that by distributing these technologies on a sufficiently wide basis, we have access to large pools of data from all over the world, from which appropriate inferences can be drawn and appropriate actions can be taken.
Yeah, the reason I asked is usually filing patents tends to restrain technology and requires licensing and payments, et cetera, which tends to minimize quite often the reach of that.
There are
my
also
colleagues can
defensive
answer.
patents. So. Oh, go ahead, Dave.
Oh, go ahead. I was going to say my colleagues can answer this one as well, but part of that was actually our strategy for getting companies with sufficient resources and interests engaged and involved in this with the hope that they would support it and help us spread the word and spread the technology. So Warren, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, there are also defensive uses of patents, which I've used in the past. We're proposing an open platform. One of the challenges is we're seeing dozens, if not hundreds, of people developing research projects, and there's no path for them to get out to any sizable number of people. If they go a commercial route, they wind up charging $20 or $30 a year or whatever. And if you have 100 different or 1,000 different conditions, that's ridiculous. So no, we absolutely see this as being something that is put out certainly to people that have the needs at no cost. There's the incremental cost of this is negligible. So it's from a business case perspective, there's certainly no barrier to providing it at no cost. Part of the concern is that there are a number of services or applications out there where people are charging $20 or $30 or $50, and that just doesn't work for the kind of thing that we're talking about. So it's going to be interesting.
It's interesting, and then I'll go to the subject. The notion of defensive patents are important. I know lack of establishing patents early in some of the internet spaces has caused patents to be filed very recently that basically try to blackmail people. So if we had filed defensive patents back then, we could have made them publicly available with no problem at all. I wanted to bring that out to the audience because that's an important part of getting technology transferred and making sure that it doesn't get invalidly commercialized. Seems to me that the, well, let me switch over to Jun for a minute.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you very much for the presentations for the speakers. Yeah, I have the questions to basically all of you, but especially for the, Clifton and those medical experts who's been working for the COVID-19 situation, because when I'm seeing from the outside the community and then, all the activities about the kind of, especially the medical experts working in the medical system and the probably entire planet has been working. So I saw the, kind of a difference on that, lifetime or timeline starting from kind of researches, investigations, clinical trials, evaluations, productions, decision, and the implementation, right? I mean, this cycle was so rapid comparing with any other experiences of the human being in the history, right? So my question, yeah, this is a cyber civilization session. Therefore, what this difference on the kind of a time scale means to the experts of the entire system. That is the speed question is the number one. Second question is as Hitomi-san mentioned at the last presentation. So used to be the kind of medical operation was international. I mean, nation by nation efforts to protect the citizens. But this was certainly the global pandemic. Therefore, all the experiences on the other part of the planet is going to be very much shared with the other parts. So I saw that very beautifully that they are learning, and then even the clinical trials on a particular country like Japan, right? Japan never employ the clinical trials result from outside Japan before, but now for the probably first time in the history, they employ the other countries' clinical trial result. So which is, to me, it's very much a revolution. So my second question is like a global impact from these experiences of COVID-19. So thank you.
I'll start there if you'd like. So 2 points there. First, as in all things, there's a speed and accuracy trade-off. And as Dr. Lacy pointed out, while many good things came out of that, and as you said, there's accelerated research. And I think one of the great things is it broke down a lot of international barriers where out of necessity, where things would normally be siloed in different countries and organizations, people of the world collaborated together to find things like vaccines and launch them and put them out as well. But at the same time, the other side of that speed accuracy trade-off is we thought things that, like you saw on one of Cliff's slides, where just completely foolish inferences were made, like the use of masks actually either made the spread of COVID worse or didn't help it at all, right? And so one of the points I think that comes out of the talks that we'd like you to hear is that we have to consider the accuracy of this as well. And it's unethical to do a study that's underpowered, right? It's one of the points that we wanted to make, that it really should be considered unethical. If you can't sit down with your statistician or your experimental design group and say, okay, we can definitively say this or not based on the results of our research, the study shouldn't be undertaken in the first place, because you add noise to the data, you add noise to the treatment programs and everything in the world, and you actually take the whole planet and society down the wrong path. Cliff, I think you were going to say something there as well.
No, let me just follow up on what you just said. It's not only unethical to do inadequately designed research, but it's also a waste. There are opportunity costs, there are funding issues, there are issues with subjects being used that otherwise can't be used in other experimental design. I mean, you're in one project, you can't be in another. So there are myriad problems with poorly designed studies. Let me address what you mentioned, and I think David hit it on the head. I mean, it's extremely important to get real-time information so that you can have actionable intelligence on what's going on. But validation and accuracy of that information is extremely important. And so following up on some of these observational studies come well-designed clinical trials, I think the whole spectrum of the kinds of research that can be done need to be done and need to validate. The first time and the other point that was made has to do with opening this up and having more of a "we are the world" philosophy here. I saw this for the first time in SARS-1. I was the health commissioner in the state of New Jersey during SARS-1. And we saw something, instead of people keeping information proprietary and holding it to themselves and trying to develop it for whatever financial gain or academic success or whatever it is, people shared information as quickly as possible, which allowed us to get our arms around the communicability and the means of spread of SARS-1, and allowed it to ultimately burn itself out, so that maybe 800 people ended up having with SARS-1, and only, well, not only, and a 10% mortality on that. But we've seen that re-emphasized now in the COVID phenomenon, that people are really binding together into a common cause and breaking down those silos, as David said, and those barriers. I hope this continues on. If it does, it will have made a major transformation in medicine and public health.
Itachi, do you have any comments? I'm probably mispronouncing your first name.
Or Hitomi.
Hitomi, any comments?
I would like to talk about in Japan after COVID-19. A couple of telemedicine services have been used as significant tools during everyone's stay home. And John and I have talked with these companies, and I found they seem to lack the idea of what is the internet or global kind of things, but somehow they very much pay attention to the securities on the internet, of the internet. This might be because almost all medical and healthcare services are thought to be the extent of conventional medical care that has been very centered on hospitals or medical experts. So I found that one of the critical roles of the medical inclusion initiative of CCRC is to see from the side of completely assumption of cyber civilization. So I believe it is a great time to cooperate with everyone like this. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I put in one other comment? The speed of need of speed of reaction to COVID has had another not necessarily desirable thing, that the normal publication systems, peer-reviewed publication systems, have almost broken down in many cases with the wanting to get it to press and doing totally inadequate peer review. So the journals that you used to be able to trust have had some problems with that, which sort of suggests that there may be better ways to do publication. Yeah, that's.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. That you know, after the internet, then you know the sharing of a data could be done in a kind of 133 milliseconds all over the world. So which is you know, very much a real time interaction. You know, I think it's true. I mean, not only the medical academics, but also any other academics, that the dynamic nature we have after the internet has not been, you know, kind of really understood and employed by that kind of decision, or the creating the data to be accurate, and you know, kind of a proof of the data type of things yet. So probably that's a very important point and a great point to for us to improve and touch.
There's one other point I'd like to make, and that has to do with having a wide opening of the funnel and getting a great deal of data into an open repository. Gives the opportunity for a great deal of hypothesis generation. And I think it'll be it'll be the trigger for many research projects going forward that otherwise probably would not have been entertained. Ultimately, though, I'm a strong believer in the randomized clinical trial. You know, there are a lot of problems with that, about generalizability and applicability to the general public. but I can tell you numerous examples of counterintuitive findings where you know, people have, for example, in cardiology, where people have heart attacks and arrhythmias, and then antiarrhythmic drugs come out that can abolish the arrhythmias completely. And it's intuitive. Good, you can stop the arrhythmias. This is great. It takes trials like the CAST trial to then take people whose arrhythmias were abolished and randomize them to placebo or active drug to find that the active drug caused 220% higher mortality than nothing. So it's extremely important to get the data, generate the hypotheses, and then test them appropriately.
Which suggests that if you remember, data in many fields is considered proprietary by the people who get the data. So there are these 1-year protection systems are out, which don't fit the dynamics of disease spread. And so that's something where we have to face as a field, how to release data in a timely fashion and still, in some sense, protect the reputation, or whatever you want to call it, of the experimenter.
I wanted to comment.
Go on.
Two things on the speed questions, very important experience that I had as a father. One was Sharon had brain fog. And for months, people with brain fog were told by their physicians that it was in their head and they should see a psychiatrist. That message that there was an issue should have gotten out very quickly. And the other was that the loss of smell was recognized fairly early, but the studies that were done around that, the data collection, the questions that were asked were so varied that the studies couldn't be compared. And as Cliff said, they were so small that you didn't get good results. So one of the things we see out of this kind of situation is the ability to react quickly and then gather consistent data.
Yeah. I gather in Japan that one of the problems with testing of new drugs is that the population of people is small that have the disease. So that's one of the motivations for going more international for proof. But that's a good sign, and we're beginning to understand that. I think we're running tight on time. Sherry?
Yes. We have 2 minutes left. If any,
okay,
we invite.
Why don't we follow the principle that was established before, and I'll give each one of you 30 seconds to give a high point, starting with Warren, and we'll go on the screen. Warren, 30 seconds.
I'm very excited about the potential for an open platform to be able to get things out very quickly. And we've come up with some really interesting ideas of when you make a request, rather than just not getting a response, that the system would actually say, this person refuses to respond or it's irrelevant, but without identifying the person. So you would have much better statistics.
David?
Data science and machine learning technology and all the analytical tools that we have now are there and waiting for us to use them. If we can simply implement the data funnel that Dr. Lacy was talking about a moment ago, where we have, as Warren said, consistent data consistently collected over a wide range of people and places, we could move forward with light speed and make extraordinary advances in medicine and the treatment of people and public health worldwide.
Clifton?
I agree with everything that was said. Data is king, but also attaching the data that is accurate to the individual that is accurate is very important as well. And one thing that we didn't talk about was that some individuals intentionally alter the data. For example, we've had people here in our state who they falsified the data to make it look like they have COVID so they can have paid time off with the family. There are other people who falsified the data in the other direction because they don't want to lose their job, and they're dependent on having that income on a regular basis. So they falsify the data so that they can stay on the job despite the fact they have COVID. So, I mean, we need to make sure the data is accurate and the linkage between the individuals and the data is intact.
Tommy?
Being healthy is one of the most fundamental demands for human nature, and everyone should have some opportunities to receive medical care as long as they are covered by networks and have digital devices. So I'd like to make happier and healthier society with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I point out too, since I don't know who the audience is completely, but in some of the technology that David and the company have described, there are many interesting little programming problems and projects that could be done, which I suspect they would welcome. I certainly would welcome, yeah. So,
very much so, thank you, yes.
Good hackers of the world unite. There's opportunities here which service mankind or personkind, or whatever the appropriate term is lately. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate that. Jun, do you have any final comment?
Well, I'm happy to see this area of work, working with cyber civilization type of researchers. So thank you very much. I really appreciate that discussion.
Hey, thank you very, very much.
Ronald.
You, Jerry.